Hi, I'm Shamara Daniels. I'm from Walla Walla University, majoring in theology with a concentration in pastoral care, and my minor is biblical languages.
Excellent. So, Shamara, um, hold on a second here. Oh, I thought Sherry had sent me something else. Something came through. Um, Shamara, let's just talk about your journey. You've spent obviously a considerable amount of time on this project because it's a sizable project. And I would like to just ask you to share with us when you did a deeper dive into justification by faith. Share with us what that journey was like the deeper you went.
I think for me, it was a lot more rewarding for my own personal spiritual journey because as an Adventist, I was taught justification by faith for a long time. And so growing up, you just kind of accept it. But I never really understood why I accepted it. And then through this project, I got to see like why righteousness by faith is so valuable compared to righteousness by law. Because growing up, I personally held myself to like righteousness by law. I thought I had to follow all the rules for God to want to have a relationship with me, to be able to continue my calling in ministry, and just day to day things. I was like, oh, I sinned way too much today. I have to work better for my salvation tomorrow. But as I continued to go through this project, I began to see that just defeats the whole purpose of grace and why Jesus came. And for me, particularly, I've always enjoyed Ellen White. And so her steps to Christ always makes me cry and makes me feel like someone actually understands what it means because she talks about her struggles and Paul's struggles. And I began to really see that Jesus understood what I was going through. And righteousness by faith is such a beautiful thing, especially when I looked at the bleeding woman. That story, it really resonated with me on there was no law that she followed to be healed. And Jesus acknowledged that in saying, your faith has healed you. And so just this journey has been very like renewing for me, and you can see it reflected in my sermons, such as my intense sermon for the evangelistic series I preached. I noticed that I began to preach on this theme and subject a bit better, and I was throwing Ellen White and some of the research components that I found without it being the sermon for the scholarship. So I found it impacting me personally, and it's also continuing to impact how my sermons look in the future. So it was just a very fun journey to go on.
Oh, delightful. Very, very good. Um, we gave you the three characters. That's Ellen White, E.J. Wagner, and Jones, and ask each of the candidates to dig into that story a little bit in the history of the church and in its own personal journey. What did you learn there? What was interesting to you personally about that?
Me, it was interesting to know that um, Jones and Wagner were a minority view in the church that eventually became the denomination's like official standing. And I always thought that like their arguments made sense, but it really threw me off that the majority of my church in the beginning didn't actually believe that. And it shocked me to know that Ellen White even believed in um, ceremonial law for a long time. But to see these two step out on like faith and to challenge the denomination, I noticed that kind of shook me in feeling like I do have the power to have transformative change in the denomination that I serve. And so for me, I just um, compliment their confidence and their willingness to like study this through. As I read, I was reading so many quotes from the Bible. It showed me what Adventism originally stood for because I'm always like, is Adventism really focused on sola scriptura or not? And those two showed me that I can be brave and I can venture out. And um, it's it's a good thing that they did that when they did, because then I would be on a much, like, I feel like the denomination as a whole would be on like a much darker path in continuing to spread perfectionism and things like that. So
So, did you appreciate Ellen White's journey, standing in the middle of that change? Uh, that was quite a remarkable position to be in, the establishment and then the concept of new theology. What did you think of her journey?
she showed me that there are leaders in the church who are willing to listen to me, and I'm not just seen as a rebel if I'm questioning or presenting an idea I found from the scripture. She shows me that I'm not going to be shut down every single time. It shows that I have leaders who genuinely want to hear what I have to say. And I think that she is remarkable in the way that she held herself and was willing to defend these two, because it shows us what good leadership in such high administration looks like. And so I feel like there was just a lot of courage involved all the way around from everybody.
Excellent.
So I commend her. Yeah.
Okay. So we also put into this conversation, um, and not everybody, I think some are just a bit surprised, but we ask you to do a journey into the importance of who Christ was. Um, I appreciated in your paper how you address that. Um, was that different than, was that new to you in some way when you looked at who Jesus was and
There
is?
were, yeah, there were components that did shock me because I don't know why, but when I, grew up hearing about Jesus and he takes our form and he was without sin, I thought he experienced temptations at the same level that I did, like mentally. But to know that he came in human form, but not necessarily taking upon him human mind, like the taintedness of our mind, that particularly shocked me. Um, because I just could not imagine being able to live a life without some form of like temptation um on like such an intellectual level. And so it made me curious more on what were some of his thoughts, like what did his thought processes look like. And it made me more willing to connect with his human side. But the idea of him coming down in our form um made sense to me. It wasn't all new, but just I was really fascinated by the intellectual part particularly.
Yeah, he took our nature but did not participate in our sin because he knew no sin, um,
Yeah.
which is certainly an interesting concept about who Christ is. Um, what do you think is important about that to a person who's struggling?
I think it's I think it's important to know that somebody was able to follow the law perfectly. Because I think that if he did have the same tainted mind that we did, um, he may have fallen similarly to us. Not to say that Jesus didn't have that capability, but to know that the Ten Commandments, the commandments of the Old Testament, and then leading up to the New Testament, and even afterwards, um, Jesus has upheld all of those things. And when I read throughout the Bible of like how the Israelites sinned and God's wrath, in a sense, to like discipline them, it makes me feel assured, especially as a woman. Politely, there's a lot of concerning rules in the Old Testament that I've wrestled with, but just to know that someone was able to 100% fulfill those, so that not that I have, like what Paul says, not to have an excuse to sin more, but rather to know that I get some form of break. So sin causes us to fall down. I feel like God gave me bandages. Like Jesus gave me bandages. And over time, he gives me the ability to heal those wounds that sin has caused me to do. So they don't go away, but they heal and then they no longer hurt me anymore. And that's grace.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. So when we look at the church today, um, I'm a volunteer pastor. I have at least on any given Sabbath, at least two, if not three, entirely different gospels that are believed by individuals in my congregation. What's even more interesting, Shamara, is that my church has also agreed to accept all three of those different perspectives as okay. And so one would be justification by faith alone. One would be moral influence that, Jesus was just an example. The other one is, I'm 9 out of 10 perfectly keeping the law. As soon as I get that last one, I'm going to be translated. Um, that that is kind of current Adventism today. If I suppose when you get out in ministry, um, so when we look at the history, how are we doing today, do you think, as Seventh day Adventists in embracing the message?
Um, I do think that we struggle to embrace it, if I'm answering honestly, because I feel like I just have always known the law. Like growing up Adventist, it was always what I could and couldn't do on and Sabbath and no pork and no like specific things I can't wear. I can't wear jewelry. I can't wear um, a certain amount of makeup. I have to watch how I dress and like all good things. But I know way more rules and laws and where to find those laws than being able to connect the Bible to someone on a much more spiritual level. And eventually, like I've grown thanks to education. But I will say that I just am a little sad because of how I see people, the church hurt that I hear is oftentimes like they were thrown out because they didn't follow specific laws. Like, for example, birth outside of marriage and things like that. Now, there are some laws that obviously I feel like have to be followed. So, for example, the safety of children and things like that, like obviously. But other things like that where it's like righteousness by faith, like even though a mother could carry out a child and have the baby, she's judged more on the fact that she had the baby outside of marriage rather than the fact that she continued that pregnancy and allowed life to come in the world. So that is difficult for me because we say righteousness by faith on paper, but I just don't see it lived out as much in the church. And I'm noticing that even sometimes in schools, it's like they highlight the students who are doing, you know, super well, like high GPAs, but who may not be able to connect with other people on like deeper emotional levels that righteousness by faith is kind of asking people to get into. Um, and so that's where I see a little bit of a struggle, but we're getting there.
Well, you now understand part of the purpose of this experience is that, when our board had this conversation, how can we best have a positive impact on the church? Uh, could we ask our young scholars to embrace this journey and let you grow into it to facilitate a healthier discussion of the gospel? And that leads us into our next question was, what is the importance of emphasizing the message? And let me frame this for you. Um, I heard you say earlier that you found yourself doing in your evangelism just naturally finding righteousness by faith was a natural message. Um, uh, Tell us a little bit about that. I think the board would be interested in that.
Yeah, so what happened is like I'm very big into education, as a lot of my professors will say. My favorite thing about biblical languages is just new perspective on something that I thought I already knew. So I love being proven wrong, you know? So that's why education is so engaging for me and why I pour so much into my academics is because that is what gets me into it because it's like being born and raised out of Venice, it's like education and being a scholar is heavily emphasized in the denomination. And so for me, after doing research, couldn't revert and see the Bible the same way that I had before the project. Now I felt like my horizons had just been expanded, and there was so much more I could give to the audience in relation to their spiritual journey because so much for me was already brought in. And so it wasn't like I was just showing them this narrow view of what I already had. So there is a lot of goodness in that narrow view. Just notice it, we got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I noticed that people were willing to respond. We have someone who came forth and was ready for baptism. We had other people who were coming and talking about really, really messy stuff that they've been in and how they want to turn away from that. And we've been doing Bible studies and visitations with people. So I noticed that the righteousness by faith, like this whole project, has helped me reach young people, especially because not, unfortunately, not a lot of young people are drawn in by the rules, but the rules are very important. I think it's important that for foundation wise, this message is used to bring in new believers because I'm really huge into our mission statement of go forth and make more disciples. Like that is my motto. And so for me, for foundation, before they become Adventists, I really, really want to help young people become Christians first to show that why Jesus, just Jesus above all of it, is way more beautiful than is actually taught. And then once they get that foundation of like, I love Christ, now we can help them figure out which family or denomination they would like to go into. And we obviously prefer the Adventist denomination, but for us, we noticed that we just had a heavier emphasis on like, we just want people to accept Christ. So I think the relevance of this message is to be able to help reach marginalized groups, particularly. Um, so like the youth or people of darker color or other marginalized groups that can really be brought in and have a firm foundation to help grow the church gradually. I don't know if that, I hope that answers kind of what you were.
Well, yeah, and I wasn't looking for an answer. I was just looking to hear what your journey has blossomed into. Because normally, with most candidates, I ask them this question. I say, how do you see the message of justification by faith being emphasized in our public evangelism rather than, the scary beasts and the Pope and various things? And what you're already confirming is that you have personally experienced this, having had the opportunity to put it out in the message and watch a response come back. Um, so you do see this having a powerful change in traditional evangelism then.
I do.
Excellent. Oh, we just lost our person. Babe, you want to